I had been a lieutenant for about a year when I was assigned back to the detective division. I'd been in the division as a sergeant leading the narcotics unit, as well as a stint running general assignment detectives prior to getting promoted, so it wasn't new. It was nice to get back into the division, though, and I looked forward to working with some of our department's most dedicated officers. Except for the evidence technicians. Years earlier, we had moved away from officers doing evidence work, and we'd hired civilian evidence technicians. They left a lot to be desired. One in particular was a handful. After giving him his third write-up for poor performance on the job, I sat down with him and had a heart-to-heart meeting. He said, "Steve, I just don't know what to do." "I don't understand," I said. "I thought we made it pretty clear what your duties are." "That's not what I mean," he responded. "I don't know how to do anything. I've never been trained." I looked at him incredulously. That couldn't be possible, could it? I pulled his personnel file and flipped through it several times. He had not been to one documented training to do his job. I went to the deputy chief and I pointed out the problem. How could we keep writing someone up for failure to do their job when we hadn't trained them? The DC who had hired the evidence technician said, "He was trained by the other evidence techs on how to do the job, and I'm not going to pay money to send someone who isn't doing a good job to training." Seriously? Seriously. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellums, and welcome to Blue Canary. Training. You're going to hear a lot about training in this season's episodes. It's the cornerstone of good police work, and unfortunately, we don't get it when we need it. There are lots of reasons why, and we're going to explore those and other training topics on this episode with our interview with Lieutenant Jim Glennon. Jim started with the Lombard Illinois Police Department in 1980 and held many positions at the department. In 1998, he became the first commander of the Dupage County Major Crimes Task Force. He also holds a BA in psychology and a master's degree in police management. He acquired Calibre Press in 2012 and today provides training through books, newsletters, seminars, online training, and in-person training. Jim took the time to talk with me about the current state of training, the problems with training, and some insight into issues facing law enforcement today. Jim, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. Your experience in training, your experience in leadership in the law enforcement fields and the officer safety has made you a priority target for me wanting to talk to for a while now. So thank you very much for coming on.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me, Steve.
Right off the bat, the first thing I want to talk about is can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved on the police training side?
Well, I mean, really, it started because as a patrol officer, I was constantly a pain in the ass to my bosses because we had no intermediate weapons in the 80s, and we had no type of controlled tactics training at all. And then, miraculously, I made sergeant, and then literally within days, I went back in and said, "We have to have this stuff." And I threw a new case that just came out called Canton, Ohio versus Harris on my chief's desk. And that's the failure to train case, Supreme Court case, I think 1987 or something like that. And so I threw it on his desk and I said, "Look, we have to train for things that we're expected to do." So he looked at me and said, "All right, just do it. You're in charge." So basically for 18 years, I was in charge of use of force. For the rest of my career, I was in charge of use of force. I read every use of force report. But I brought in the PPCT system. We had about 75 police officers, and I got 10 of them trained as defensive tactics instructors. And we kind of expanded beyond that because I was really, really aware of our inability to do our job safely. So that's kind of how it started. I started teaching the defensive tactics, but I also, the only thing I brag about, because I can't hammer two sticks together, is I was really, 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 really good at getting confessions. So I was a detective for about half my career. And the reason they picked me early, I was on only 3.5 years when they picked me, is I had a reputation for being able to get confessions. And that's because I had some natural instincts there, but I had a psychology degree and I read body language books and I paid attention. So then I started teaching that. I started teaching communication. I became a hostage negotiator. And I saw the value of communication. And then pretty soon I went and I got my master's degree and I started teaching management courses, and the rest is kind of history. I just kept going. So it's been actually, I think from the first time I ever taught It's probably been about 32 years right now.
And of course, you kept going right up until taking over at Calibre Press, which I know early in my career, that Calibre Press training was essential to some of the things. I remember as a young cop going to those first Calibre Press schools and sitting in those classrooms and hearing those stories. That had a very big effect on me and what I was doing.
Yeah, I remember I was on a night shift in the early 80s. We used to get survival selections from Calibre Press. It was like there was no internet, so that's how they marketed. And I never thought in a million years I would own the company at some point. But in 2002, I think, somebody from Calibre Press saw me teaching a management course and asked me if I wanted to join Calibre and teach street survival. And I'm telling you, I leapt at the chance. I mean, that was like to me, that was the gold standard. That was the pinnacle of law enforcement training.
That is still the one class too. I tell everybody I teach that this is the class you pay your own way to. You've got to go sit in this class. And I think that's an absolute must for officers across the U.S.
Yeah, and I appreciate that as the owner of the company. It's interesting though, because I saw a version of it in the early 90s, but then when they asked me to come on, I had to watch 2 courses before I could train it. And at that point, the course had started to me deteriorate in the early 2000s. And I can't even explain why. I just thought, it lacked something. It was still a good course. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I thought it was really good, but it needed to be modernized for sure. We needed to talk about more current topics. What they did, it was complete officer safety, but it wasn't really discussing, really the legal ramifications of it anymore, of using force. They didn't really go deep into that stuff. So another guy started with me, and we kind of brought all this stuff on. And so I stopped teaching everything else because they paid better, to be honest with you. And I didn't have enough time. So I was teaching about 15 to 18 2-day courses a year while I was still a full-time commander. So my wife and sister then got jobs with them, and they started working out of their house. So when I retired, it's way too long of a story to get into, but it's incredibly long, but it's cool. But we had the opportunity to buy Calibre Press. Again, there was a lot of things that were changing, and we had a completely different idea about how street survival should run. And so Calibre Press for 32 years was just street survival. And as we sit here now, I think we have about 25 different courses.
When you talk about training and the importance of training, why do police agencies have such a difficult time providing training for their officers?
There's a lot of reasons for that. There's the joke about the cops. Cops hate doing the same thing over and over and over. The only thing they hate more is change.
Right.
This is the perfect job if you want to be lazy.
Right.
You could be a lazy cop for 30 years and get away with it. In fact, you might get promoted getting away with being lazy. I mean, if you think about it, the requirements for what police officers have to do in terms of their career is to stay out of trouble. Think about, do we ever fire a guy after 10 years of lousy work? I had a guy tell me early in my career, remember this always, kid, they can't shove it up your ass if you're sitting on it.
That's phenomenal. That's
phenomenal.
Fantastic.
And when I tell that in courses, the guys go, I'm writing that shit down. I mean,
oh yeah, that's phenomenal.
No, that's what I was told. I remember we had to write, when I got on, we had to write 20 tickets a month. That's what I was told. And it was 20 tickets keeps a sergeant off your ass. That's what they told me. I mean, first day on the job. And I, so I'm in training and I'm finally on my own. And I think like when I'm on my own, I wrote like 45 tickets in a month or something like that. I even asked the guy, I go, where do you come up with the 20 tickets? I thought there might be some kind of safety algorithm that they,
right.
And he goes, well, you work about 20 days a month. They figure you can do at least one ticket.
Do at least one a day. Yep.
So I came in with 45 tickets and I'm in roll call. And the sergeant, who I liked a lot, I liked him a lot. His first name is Pat. And Pat says in front of everybody, hey, Glennon, see me in my office. I want to talk to you about your tickets last month. And I sat there for 15 minutes thinking, man, I'm going to get a trophy. And I walked in his office. And again, I liked Pat.
Right.
I walked in his office and he goes, you wrote 45 tickets last month? I go, yeah. And he goes, how many do we ask for? I said, 20. He goes, so why did you give me 45? And I said, what? He goes, you know what 45 tickets is? That's 25 more chances that you're going to piss somebody off and they're going to come and call me. You know why I became a sergeant? Because I don't like to talk to the public. The only time I have to talk to the public is if one of you assholes messes up. So, if you want to go 22, 24, that's fine, but don't be going up into the 30s and 40s.
I had something really similar. We had like a one traffic stop a day kind of requirement thing. And I get called in every month, Steve, you don't have enough traffic tickets this month. And I'd always be like, well, how many felonies you want me to give back?
Yeah,
and they
right.
just get mad at me.
Exactly.
Get out of here. You got to get more traffic stops. I'm like, because you don't really care about police work. You care about whatever this kind of number algorithm that makes no sense that you have.
They want the numbers so they can show it to a bunch of people who don't know anything. But my joke always is they hold it up in front of the city council and go, look at all the check marks we have here. Yeah, what do they mean? We don't know, but there's a lot of them, right? It's just proof. There's an old saying by Peter Drucker, who is a guru of management. He said, "Don't mistake movement with progress." And I literally said to the sergeant, "So you want me to do less?" And he goes, "Yes." Think about this. All over the country right now, when do police officers get fired? They get fired for doing.
Right.
They don't get fired for not doing. In fact, they get rewarded for not doing. Because law enforcement is a legislated bureaucratic monopoly. We have no competition. We don't even know what success is. Because nobody cares about your police department unless they want you or if you screw something up. I have been, maybe you've seen this, when I travel the country teaching, I have seen 5-6 times signs in police departments, don't make it onto YouTube today.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And we saw that big when COVID hit and so many police departments turned the lights off. They went, don't get on CNN and don't get sick. So don't do anything. Watch Netflix. Don't do anything. And you took an entire generation of police officers here for the last 2 years. You turned the lights off, and we've seen what the fatalities in traffic accidents go through the roof because we're doing zero traffic enforcement. We're seeing violent crime going through the roof because there's no proactive policing taking place. And as you said, we get no benefits for succeeding, but we do definitely get pointed out for our failures, don't we?
Yes. Yeah. One of the classes, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but I show about 7 different cities and show arrests down this much, homicides up that much. And it's really remarkable when you look at it. I mean, I live right outside of Chicago. My daughter lives in Chicago. Chicago itself had over 800 murders last year. Cook County had over 1,000 murders last year. I mean, that's more than like 5 states will have in 5 years.
Well, and we're seeing, I'm right outside of Indianapolis, and we're seeing the violent crime specifically in a city like Indianapolis doubling and tripling. The homicide rates last year was another record, and a record after a record after a record homicide years. And it kind of goes back to that statistics you talked about and hitting that benchmark and doing no more and being able to check a box that you did something. And it feels to me like that's where we're at with training now is all I want to do is check a box and say they were trained. I really don't care if they learn.
Well, yes. Here's the other issue, though, too, Steve. When you asked, why is training so hard? There's a myriad of reasons, but let's go to the top. And I don't mean the chiefs. Go to the politicians. These same people, after some video goes viral, these same politicians will get in front of a camera and go, I can't believe this happened in our town. I can't believe this happened in my state. And they go, oh, this is terrible. We're going to get to the bottom of this, But these are the same people that every single year won't invest in their police departments. They will not invest in law enforcement training. They just flat out don't do it. And we know, you know this, every time there's a budget crunch, what is the first line item we cut? Training.
Right.
So now you get these politicians who are literally looking in cameras just to get some cred. But that's where it starts. They don't want to spend the money to invest in training. Then you go to the chiefs. There's a lot of really, really, really good chiefs out there. I'm not saying this is negative I'm not trying to be negative on all chiefs. But certainly the bigger the departments, the less they're training. They just don't invest. And I'll tell you, I saw this the first time several years ago before George Floyd. But some video went viral, and I'm watching it. And I'm like, yeah, maybe the cop went a little bit overboard, but it's not that bad or whatever it was, I forget. But the chief of police is on TV and he looks at the camera and he goes, this is not consistent with our values and training. And I happen to know the department. And I literally yelled at the TV, you're lying. It's perfectly consistent with your values and training because you don't value training at all. I know you don't train in your department. Then when the proverbial, feces hits the oscillating device, you got all these chiefs and politicians pointing to these 24-year-old cops. I'm like, you guys you're so disingenuous hypocrites. It's going to get worse. People keep asking me, when's the pendulum going to swing? Because you're starting to see some of it swing back from the perspective that citizens are getting pissed.
Right.
Nobody now, even and I don't want to get political, but the Democrats who are running on defund the police are going, oh, we didn't mean that.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what you meant.
Might have picked a different word then, because defund the police is quite clear as to what your meanings were. And, we talk about police reform, which is one of the things that a lot of these politicians are patting themselves on the back for. But when they're I'm a firm believer in police reform. We need to be reforming our profession. But when you look at, and I've made this joke before, but when you look at the medical field and you have reform, well, the doctors sit on those panels. When you have reforms in your court, your judges sit on those panels. When you have reform in law enforcement, Karen on Facebook sits on the panel.
Right. Or a bunch of retired chiefs.
Well, exactly. And chiefs are politicians. I'm sorry that there are good, as you said, there are great chiefs and sheriffs out there, but to be a chief or sheriff requires you to be a politician first.
Yeah. Yes.
And so all those struggles will come into play. And so we see mandates, specifically on the training level, right? De-escalation being the new big one. How's that affected some of the training that you guys are trying to provide?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When COVID hit, we had, in 2019, we did 235 in-person seminars in North America, Canada and the United States, mostly obviously in the United States, probably 95% in the United States. We had a meeting in our offices here. And we said, we're getting so busy, we have to hire some more personnel, some instructors and some salespeople. We have to. We were that successful. But then we hired a CEO 3 years ago to help us out. And we sat there and tried to figure this out. And then COVID hit literally the next week. And then we're looking at laying people off. So because within 10 days, all of our classes were canceled for the next 6 months. And it's just, for us, it was like 1929, the stock market. I was ready to, jump out of a window. They kept saying to me, well, they have mandated training in most states. They have to train. I go, they're going to suspend all of this training. And remember, at the beginning of COVID, people were acting like it was the Black Plague. So we didn't know, right? So, and then George Floyd happened, and that changed everything. At that point, we were starting to put our online together, which we had been talking about for years, but we were so busy we could never get to it. As soon as George Floyd happened, I said, our implicit bias class and our de-escalation classes are going to explode. We have to figure out a way to get these classes to the cops. And within days, our phone was ringing off the hook. And so luckily we had these classes, and then we started doing live online courses and de-escalation and implicit bias. And then we have a really good class called Duty to Intervene, the Legal Ramifications, or something along those lines, with Scott Wood, who's an attorney and an expert in this area. And those three classes immediately hit. And to make your point, there were some training directors and chiefs, because 88% of all the 12,000 departments, 12,000 local departments, 88% are less than 100 cops, 48% are less than 50. So it's, a lot of small departments. And we had training directors and chiefs calling and going, hey, we need implicit bias. And we have a half a day, we have a full day, we have a 2-day training, train the trainer on it. And we say, what do you need? And we go, I don't care. I just have to check the box and let my mayor know that everybody went through the training. So it's still a check the box mentality for a lot of people out there.
And I think that's terribly unfortunate. And as a live trainer and having done so much live training, I really struggle with the online training. I can't make the connections that I like in class. I can't follow through with the questions I like. I can't ensure that my students really understand the topics I'm trying to talk about. The necessity for it is clear. But as a trainer, I personally struggle with those online classes. And even though I do provide some of them, I find it much less satisfying for me as a trainer teaching those classes.
Well, I tell you, man, the thought at first, I was literally depressed over it. The thought of looking into a black hole for a half a day or a full day and just talking without seeing the reactions, like you said, without watching the body language, without getting the interaction, made me sick. But it isn't as bad as I thought. I figured out a way pretty quickly to get these guys involved. And we have a chat thing that goes on. You can see it's live. And I tell them right out of the gate, I go, this is going to be a terrible day if you're not involved. And I mean terrible for me, because this is a really, really, really good course. You guys are going to really like this course. I'm telling you right now, you're going to like this course. There's going to be a whole bunch of video. We're going to really analyze the stuff. We're going to, I go through all that. I need you involved. So first off, tell me, how many of you guys are actually trainers? And just tell me what you train. And that gets them going. And they start writing, I'm a DT guy, I'm a communication guy, FTO, and whatever it is. Have you ever looked into a black hole? No, I don't know how you do it. How many of you guys are supervisors? So you kind of get them going that way. Cops want to get together. They need personal interaction. So I think, live training will come back. And the other thing we do is we rent our programs, which is, I think we're the first to really do it the way we're doing it.
I was going to say, what do you mean by rent your programs?
Yeah, well, you go right to our website and say, I want implicit bias, right? It's we have a 3-hour version of that. So if you want to rent, call this or email here or click this, and then Linda deals with it. And so let's say you're a department of like 80 officers, right? And they need to get them all through. Well, you can't send them all down at the same time. So we rent the program to them for like 30 days or 60 days, depending on how big they are and how much they want it. Even some people say, I can get it all done in a week. But we go, okay, whatever you need. And this is the price per officer. And now we have every 20 minutes in these programs, it stops and there's a question they have to answer.
Right, just to make sure somebody's still there, right?
Right, because we all know the scam. I mean, back in the 90s, they started doing this. One guy had watched the thing, write down all the answers and give it to the other 80 cops in the department.
Yeah, and everybody else just walks in and signs a training sheet and walks out.
Exactly, yeah. So they needed some kind of a quality control, quality assurance. And we did it. I'm telling you, it was a pain because you have to rebuild your website. That costs an astronomical amount. You have to find the experts, the technical experts for this. So it's tough.
Blue Canary is here to help you tell your stories. And I couldn't do that without the help of some very generous sponsors. Let's take a quick break to hear from one.
Help your team rise to increasing expectations with Agency 360's cloud-based software. Whether it is for the training of new employees or annual performance evaluations, Agency 360 can help trainers and supervisors streamline documentation, create consistency, and communicate clearly. Help retention by setting the tone and culture early with Agency 360. Learn more at agency360.com. That's AGENCY360.com.
I want to go back and talk a little bit about the de-escalation training, because I think that's kind of interesting right now, because as a police officer with experience there, I have a very good understanding of what de-escalation is and trying to keep that fight from happening and trying to avoid that fight, trying to avoid any violence and keep that violence down. But it seems to me like certain politicians have an entirely different definition of de-escalation. Have you guys run into that? How are you seeing that? And how are you dealing with that in your training?
Well, we deal with it directly. I had a training guy called me a couple of years ago. We were going there to teach I forget the course that we were teaching, but it had de-escalation in it. And he, the sales staff says he wants to talk to you. So I call him. I go, "What's up?" And he says, "Hey, you're coming?" I go, "Yeah." You're going to talk about de-escalation, right? I go, "Yeah." He said, "Are you going to pass out de-escalation cards?" And I said, "What?" He goes, a card that they can put in their pocket, like laminated, that they can pull out and kind of read to people to calm them down. And I go, I laughed. I thought he was kidding me. He wasn't. So I said, "Listen, if I had a card like that, you couldn't afford to bring me in, because that thing'd be worth $1 billion. If I came up with the magic words that calmed every schizophrenic down in the United States, I think, it cost you a few bucks." So what we do in the class, we absolutely attack it. We attack it. And we show videos. where, you show it to the police guy. Like there's a case out of St. Paul where a police officer's in a car and he stopped at a stop sign and he gets hit from behind. And this happened to me 2-3 times where somebody bumps my back, my squad. You always get out and there's somebody, oh my God, I can't believe I hit a cop,
Right.
Well, this guy did it to get the police officer out, and he charges the officer with a knife. And the officer starts backing up and pulls his gun and he goes, drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it. And 13 seconds later, he shoots him, kills him. And so I go, did this guy try to de-escalate the situation? And people go, well, he didn't have enough time. But then some guys go, yeah, he tried to de-escalate. And, the younger guys go, well, no, he didn't. Yeah, what did he do? He created distance. He backed up. He told the guy to put the knife down.
Gave verbal commands, yeah.
Gave verbal commands. I said, when could he have shot him? And everybody goes, immediately. He didn't. He backed away from this guy. He did his best not to shoot him. But then I show a quote from a politician who says that it was an illegal shoot and he should have used de-escalation tactics. So I said, here's the problem with, I've written, if you want to look at it, I wrote a pretty good article, and I don't usually brag about my articles, but I wrote a pretty good article about this 2 years ago.
Oh, I'm the reason I'm asking is I've read it. I thought it was an excellent article.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm slow pitching you here because I thought it was an excellent article, and I definitely wanted you to talk about it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I was pretty proud of that one. And I said in the article something to the effect that they think that we have these de-escalation arrows in our quiver, and all we have to do is pull them out. These proven, tried and true phrases that de-escalate everybody. And we just choose not to do it because we're asshole cops. I mean, that's literally how they, you see these politicians, wow, I didn't see any de-escalate. Okay, what does that mean? They think we have de-escalation fairy dust in our pocket. And if we sprinkle it on their heads, everybody's going to calm down and hug each other. So I had a guy in a class say, I showed a tasing incident. And I said, is a taser a de-escalation device? And a bunch of people said no. And an older cop in there goes, what are you talking about? Of course. He goes, his only other option was to shoot this guy. He de-escalated the guy by tasing him.
What came to mind, too, when I thought about that exact article you were writing about, and then in Columbus, Ohio, with the Michaela Bryant shooting, where the officer had to deal with that incredibly rapidly developing situation. And all of a sudden, the politicians, including the chief, was making comments leading you to believe that there was something else that he should have done to stop that from happening.
Yeah, now I remember it a little bit differently from the chief perspective. I know there was somebody from the agency or the city said, but actually the chief of police at some point, I know at least this point, somebody asked him a question, why didn't you shoot her in the arm? And the chief kind of ripped into the reporter about that. But you got LeBron James putting up your next accountability. Here's the thing, the police officer, 13 seconds after he opened the door in Columbus, he killed a 15-year-old. But he also saved the 15-year-old.
That's right.
From being stabbed to death. It's just absolutely amazing. And when you do the same thing, you look at Jacob Blake up in Kenosha, which is only 60 miles from my house. Jacob Blake, where he got shot going into the car, he got shot in the back by the police, where everybody went nuts. But LeBron James said, well, I got a quote from LeBron James in the class. We have a really good class called Legally Justified, but Was It Avoidable? And we break down all shootings and uses of force into basically 4 categories. And then what we do is we analyze all these and put them in these categories. But with the Jacob Blake case, in that course, I show the quote not only from LeBron James. LeBron James said, they could have talked to him, they could have grabbed him, they could have tackled him. Why does it always have to be a gun that's getting fired? And I'm like, statistically, it's never a gun getting fired. And then when the truth comes out, they talked to him, they warned him, they grabbed him, they tased him. He had a knife. He admitted to the police that he was grabbing the knife when he was shot. He admitted he refused to put the knife down. They characterized this right away as he was taking his kids to get him away from a domestic violence situation. No, he wasn't. He was taking the kids against the mother's will. He was taking her car. He was on a warrant because he had sexually assaulted her or abused her a few weeks before this. None of that mattered because somebody had a cell phone. And then these, I'm going to say it, idiots like LeBron James come out without having any facts, but 500 million Twitter followers, and puts these false facts out. And everybody's like, the police are out of control. He said, where was the de-escalation? The governor said something about de-escalation. What's de-escalation? I had a guy in a class. I was at an ILEADA conference a couple of weeks ago, the ILEADA conference down in St. Louis. And a guy in the class, we're talking about this, said, Is shooting a guy in the head de-escalation? It was a great question. And then and these are the more veteran cops goes, yeah, if he's about to kill someone. So the problem is that the politicians, like implicit bias, they throw these phrases out. And accompanied with those phrases and these words is an unrealistic expectation on the part of the public that there's this algorithmic formula that the police have learned, but they just don't want to follow it. And if we did, nobody'd ever get shot. Nobody'd ever resist arrest.
Right. And now we have all of these police reform movements that are mandating de-escalation training. And, as long as we have good instructors and good trainers that understand the concepts of these things and can provide that training, that's fantastic. But when the politicians start getting involved in what the actual material is going to be trained, I think we put officers' lives at risk.
I'll tell you something. We deal with all 50 states, obviously. Some of them have very, 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 very strict post requirements boards and things like that. Others don't have virtually anything. Now, Illinois has never, until like 3 years ago, maybe, Illinois has never had a requirement for continuing education for police officers outside of qualifying with their handgun once a year.
I did not realize that.
Yeah.
Indiana's we've had it in Indiana for 20 plus years of, mandating. Now it's up to 24 hours of mandated in-service training. Now, my argument about that is at least 15 hours of it are taken up by things like precious metals and silly stuff like that. But at least we're getting continuous in-service training.
Well, the thing is, the politicians, it's a famous phrase from decades, but unfunded mandates. They just go, well, they should train in this. That sounds good. Put my name on the implicit bias bill. Put my name on that, and then everybody signs that. Implicit bias bill. But they don't even know what implicit bias is. And what Calibre Press does is we create classes based on our experience, but also a lot of research. Very educated instructors I have. But our goal is always this. It has to be realistic. It has to be applicable.
I'm really interested in your view of the Kimberly Potter verdict and that shooting, that even the jury said they didn't think she had an intent, but she made a mistake and then she ends up in jail.
Yeah. Listen, I do my best when these things come out to hold my tongue until after, it goes through the judicial process. But there's been a couple of exceptions. One was the Philando Castile case up in Minnesota also. Remember that Officer Yanez shot?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and that went viral because she had it on Facebook, his passenger. And I did the same with Kim Potter. And here's what I said before the verdicts were in. I said for Philando Castile, or the Yanez case, I said he's not going to be found guilty of what he was charged with, which I think was second-degree manslaughter. And I ran a homicide task force for about 7 years, so I kind of know a little bit about this. I said, just look at the elements of the offense. I said, the elements of offense are that gross negligence led to the death of Philando Castile. I said, it wasn't gross negligence. It was his absolute intent. He pointed his gun at Philando Castile and put 7 rounds into him. That was intentional. And I was on a podcast with NPR. And she goes, well, then what should he be charged with? I said, I'm not saying he should be charged with anything. She goes, well, you sound like you should charge him with murder. I go, no. I'm just saying that this doesn't make sense. The elements of the offense are all that matter. Well, in the Kim Potter case, it's the same thing. How they came to, yes, everybody. Oh, well, no, that's not true. That's not true because some politicians believe that she did it on purpose.
Right.
But 99.9% of the people, even if they hate the cops, believe Kim Potter made a mistake. So if you read the elements of that offense, and I don't have them in front of me right now, but I think on appeal, this is going to get tossed.
I would certainly hope so, because I know that's the kind of verdict that puts fear in the heart of your active police officers who know that they have to make these decisions so quickly. And if you make a mistake, and it's a horrible, terrible mistake that we don't want anybody to have to make happen, but then to turn around and everybody say, yeah, you screwed up, but here's prison, that has a tremendous effect on the psyche of officers out there working the streets today.
Well, yeah, sure it does. And, when you look at the Washington Post, New York Times and things like that, they always say, yes, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. Look, this is the first time in Minnesota in the last 40 years or something. I'm making that up, but, that an officer has been charged. What they imply is that police are getting away with murder. And obviously that's not true.
Right.
I pay for the Washington Post, even though I don't really subscribe to their opinions, because they track every fatal police shooting in the United States. They have since 2015. It's called Fatal Force. And over the last 6 years, on average, law enforcement officers in the United States have shot and killed 988 people a year, on average, 988. We have about 300 million contacts with people. And that's not exaggerated. In fact, I saw one guy say it's about 450 million contacts with people. So if you take 300 million and then divide that by 988, you literally come up with the number 0.001 or something to that effect. It's just, so we really don't have this epidemic of police violence that the press and activists and many politicians presume that we do.
The particularly the Kimberly Potter case, one of those things that kind of bugged me about it was that I felt, at least as a trainer, that those types of mistakes, those slip errors, which is what occurred, is those types of mistakes are avoidable with proper training. And since, most taser training is non-dynamic, not within scenario based across the United States, it's walk into a room, pick one up, point it at a cardboard target, pull the trigger, you've been taser trained. I think that is lending to these types of mistakes. And if agencies really went back and embraced the training concepts, went to scenario-based training, some very dynamic training with a lot of these particularly high-risk issues, you never can eliminate everything, but we can definitely put a dent in it.
We have 5 videos of people yelling taser, 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 and firing their weapon.
Right.
That we show. But Taser did put out a stat, and it's like, obviously it's negligible how often this does happen. But you hit on a point that is very, very dear to my heart. When people say that, there's systemic issues in law enforcement that are either racist or violence is systemic, like people go, we train like warriors. And I always said, if we trained more like warriors, we'd even shoot less than we do now. The problem is we don't train at all. I'll tell you something. I had a woman from Netflix call me last year and interviewed me for a series they're thinking about doing. I haven't heard back from her. I talked to her 2 or 3 times. But she started out by saying this: I want to let you know I'm a female. I live in Manhattan. I have a master's degree, and I'm very liberal. That's how she started it. I said, okay. I said,
it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, right. She was cool. She goes, I want you to know that, because I know, you're a cop, more conservative. I said, no, I'm fine with that. I go, I'm pretty liberal in a lot of things, but okay. But she said, and here's the other reason I'm going to tell you this. All of my friends who live in Manhattan are very educated and are very liberal. I said, all right. And she said, until I started investigating this, I, as did all my friends, thought every day when the police go to work, you spend a half hour shooting your gun and a half hour practicing karate. I go, come on, you did not. She goes, absolutely, we did. I go, that's more training than we get in a year.
Right.
She goes, that's what we're finding out. And that's the biggest problem in law enforcement. Here's what I say. Like the Kim Potter case. I asked taser trainers, I just did last week in St. Louis, a bunch of them were in there. How often do you train with the taser? Once a year. Why? It's required. How long does the training take? Well, we read them a bunch of stuff. So it's nothing. Right.
Right.
And then I do this in all my classes, but we actually did a survey on this, and this is what we found out. 70% of the agencies in this country go to the range no more than twice a year. And if they're only going to the range twice a year, what's the only reason they're going?
To check a box.
Right. To qualify, right? Because the state says you got to do it. And I said, and so what are you learning about a gunfight? And everybody goes, nothing. I go, no, you're learning how to lose them. And then number 2 is, how often mandated do you have to do some kind of defensive tactics training? And that's terrible. I mean, we don't do any of it. Even at my department, by the time I left, we had about 80 police officers, 75, 80. 22 of them were defensive tactics instructors. So we did defensive tactics training every month for 45 minutes. And then we had like two days a year, it was 8 hours. And that still wasn't enough.
Right. And you're like the only agency in the United States doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt there's many more.
There's not many more of those.
No. And I was in martial arts for a long time, and I was never any good at it. They give you a black belt for paying your dues long enough. But I went 4, 5, 6 times a week because I loved it. I loved it. It kept me in shape. But if somebody grabbed my lapel and I was asleep, my hands would move to get that hand off my lapel, right? Because I would do that lapel thing 20, 30, 40 times a day, right? That's procedural memory. That's muscle memory, if you will. We don't do anything like that in law enforcement. Nothing. We do not invest in the greatest resource we have is our personnel. We don't invest in that. We certainly don't invest in real good training. So when do people make mistakes? And Kim Potter's a perfect example. What I always say in my leadership classes, especially, but we have a human performance class too, is I said the vast majority, if not all, of the mistakes that police officers make, let's go 99%, are made when they are experiencing acute stress. So if we were private companies and we could actually go out of business, if we had competition, we would ask ourselves a very simple question. Where are we the most vulnerable to having one of our people injured, us injuring one of our clients, or us destroying the relationship with our clients? And I don't call the citizens clients really, but if it was a private company, they would be clients. Where are we most vulnerable to destroying the relationship and having people get hurt? We'd say when one of our employees is involved in an acute stress event. That's what it would be. How much training do you do in acute stress? Oh, none. We're just going to throw the kid under the bus if he makes a mistake and act like it's not our fault.
Jim, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. This has been absolutely wonderful. You hit on some of the really important things that are going on in law enforcement right now and the things that people need to be really aware of. Is there any last thing you want to say before we go?
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to say is that law enforcement, there's a great scene in Moneyball. You know that movie Moneyball?
Yes.
There's a great scene at the beginning. I love it. I show it in some of my classes where Jonah Hill is the geek.
Right. Yeah.
And he says to Brad Pitt, who's a general manager of the Oakland A's, he said, baseball management thinking is medieval. And they think of buying players. They should be trying to buy wins, and you buy wins by buying runs. Well, that reminds me of law enforcement because our thinking's medieval in a lot of ways. We have not embraced like human performance science. We have not embraced the realities of what is going on out there the way we should. Nobody wants to spend money and invest in law enforcement or the criminal justice system. You always we need criminal justice reform. Then you ask the average person, what does that mean? They have no idea what it means. They don't even know what the criminal justice system is. So we have to take a lead, like you're doing right now. We have to take a lead. We have to be proactive. Us older guys who've been around, we have experience, we travel the country, we meet people. We have to be out there and start advocating for a change in law enforcement. And that really does start with the political class. And we need to have some bosses out there that care more about their people and the mission of the organization than their post-police careers in some think tank someplace. We have to start standing up and taking control of some of these conversations. We've been on our heels for way too long.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Steve, and it was very, very nice talking to you.
And that's the story we have to tell. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.